On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we discuss, should the Lightning trade Victor Hedman? We talk about some offseason targets, as well as another update for the Stanley Cup playoffs. All that coming up and more on Locked On Lightning.
You're Locked On Lightning, your daily podcast on the Tampa Bay Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome to another episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Adam Danker. Thank you for joining me on this episode of Locked On Lightning. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game on. We got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now free on the Google Play or the App Store. Game on. On this episode of Locked On Lightning, we're talking about the conversation that is really kind of starting to bubble up online, around the internet. Should the Lightning trade Victor Hedman with his deal up after next year? We talk about some offseason targets for the Tampa Bay Lightning. Who should they go after, especially in free agency? And we wrap things up with some Stanley Cup playoffs talk. But before we get into all that, please, I want to humbly remind you to go ahead and download this episode if you're listening to us on an app-based streaming platform. You could also go ahead and subscribe to our channel on YouTube. Hit that thumbs up button. Helps the episode grow and reach more people that may not know about our channel. So this is something I've been starting to see more and more, especially since yesterday when I was talking about, now with Stamkos, obviously that's the big talk for the Lightning. That's the big, really, that's the first hurdle, the offseason hurdle, I guess we could call it that, that the Lightning need to get over, and that is re-signing Stamkos. And obviously the tricky thing about that, as I discussed on yesterday's episode, was that not only you want to get him for a good price, you also want to put in a deal in place to where it's going to set the precedent for Victor Hedman. And pretty much even before that, a lot of you have been saying that the Lightning should trade him. And I like that idea. Trust me, I do. I would rather, if it were possible, and this is how I really approach every player that we kind of all don't feel good about the odds of them re-signing with Tampa. Unless, obviously, they were picked up at the deadline, which really not much you can do after that. But I always feel like it is somewhat irresponsible, unless, obviously it's like a Stamkos situation. But, I always find it irresponsible to just let a player walk, especially when you kind of knew all along that wasn't going to work out to where you're going to get an extension done and bring them back. And that goes for every sport. I'm not just talking about hockey here. But I feel like, especially where the Lightning are right now, they're in dire need of draft picks, minor league assets, just trade chips in general. And on top of that, they're really, really thin at the defensive position. Now, having said that, the Hedman situation, it's interesting because he's not at the back end of his career. He's still, he's in his early 30s, which a lot of people, including myself, I mean, it feels like he's been in Tampa Bay for like 100 years. But I look at the Hedman situation, and I think that when people start talking about him, should he be traded? Should Tampa trade him? I mean, he could, in theory, be traded, absolutely. But you're really, in my opinion, not going to get much back for him. Like I said on yesterday's episode, and I've said for a long time, even though Hedman's in his early 30s, and he does show stretches of which he still has the talent. He still can be effective. There's also stretches beyond that, between those stretches, that really show the wear and tear, that really show the miles that he's got on him. And my biggest fear, as well as with an extension on Stamkos as well, is that you sign these guys to a deal, let's say 5 more years. Okay, just throwing out numbers out there. Sign them to 5 more years, and then they give you maybe 2 more, maybe even 1 more good season, and then it's just downhill from there. And you know, some people will say, well, you know what, having them retire in Tampa Bay is the thing that matters most. And no, it doesn't. When you're cash strapped and you're giving guys money that really aren't really earning their keep. I don't care if you're Maxwell Crozer or you're Steven Stamkos. But with Hedman, you know, a lot of people, it's interesting because a lot of people are saying trade Hedman, and my response to all of you, and what I want you all to do, this is kind of like your little homework assignment. My response to you is, how much value do you in reality think you're going to get back for him? Like, unless you're trading him to a contender who is in dire need of a defenseman, and even then, you're not going to get a first-round pick of any worth. From other teams, you're probably not. Maybe you might have to sweeten the pot a little bit. But on the other side of it, you know, if I'm an opposing team, it doesn't matter. Let's say middle of the pack team that could very well make the playoffs, could very well not. All right. And the Tampa Bay Lightning call me and say, do you want to make a deal for Victor Hedman? And they say a first rounder and whatever the case may be. I'm going to laugh in their face. And I'm going to say absolutely not, because really at the end of the day, this guy's got 3, maybe 2 more good years in him. And we've seen how he has played when he's just been really ineffective. I mean, I said it yesterday, and from some of the comments I've seen on our YouTube channel underneath that video, a lot of you made it seem like I was being blasphemous, but really at the end of the day, I was speaking facts, people. Okay. You know, he had a good season on paper. But there was a lot of times where he was really not effective defensively, and that's his main job. The offensive side of things, that's an added plus, but a defenseman that can't play defense, especially on a very very bad defensive team, that's not good. That's not good whatsoever. And so I ask all of you, Locked On Lightning listeners or Lightning fans, or those of you who are just coming in for curiosity, I want you to comment below this video on YouTube. I want you to give me your best trade proposal. I want you to give me the team. I want you to give me, all of it. I want to hear your best trade proposals, and we'll discuss it on tomorrow's episode, because I want to get a gauge for where you all think the NHL landscape is when it comes to Victor Hedman. Like I said, I mean, the Lightning could easily make a deal in which they trade him away, but they're not going to get really that much value, or really maximum value, that maybe some of you would expect the Lightning to get. You're not getting a quality first round pick. The highest pick you'll probably get in the first round for Victor Hedman is maybe mid-round. And even then, getting 1 pick back for your number one defenseman is not good enough in my book. It's really not. And in this day and age, I mean, I don't, the NHL is so close in terms of competition. I mean, we saw it this past year with the amount of teams that were in it at one point in the wild card, in both conferences, really more so the Eastern Conference. But I really don't see a scenario in which really a team is going to be, jumping and clawing their way to get Victor Hedman and giving everything up for him. So in my opinion, what you do is you got to keep him. You got to keep him, allow him to just play his days out. in Tampa Bay, not for nostalgia reasons, but to also allow him to teach the next generation of Lightning defensemen. Because let's face it, Chernak, I'm not big on him anymore. I'm sorry. He doesn't do it for me anymore. He's another one that at times, yes, he has been solid. And at other times, I mean, him not playing was just as good as, not hearing his name. And so really my game plan, if I were the Lightning GM, is to keep him here to really just tutor or really mentor the next generation of Lightning defensemen. And hope that he has more good stretches than really quiet stretches. Because as we all know, with Victor Hedman, when he gets quiet, the quietness is deafening in his play. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, how you feel. Like I said, I want to see your best trade proposals. I do, and we'll talk about them because I'm very curious as to where everybody stands. If you've been a listener for quite some time of this podcast, it's an open forum. And I'm willing to hear all opinions, all advice, all criticisms. One I got the other day, actually today I saw, it was because I misspoke. I said that Panarin wasn't a top player on the Rangers, which obviously I'm very well aware that he is. But my question to that fan is he enough to carry the Rangers? We'll talk about that later on when we're talking about playoff teams. But coming up in just a little bit, I'm going to talk about some of my wish list for offseason targets for this upcoming summer for free agents for the Tampa Bay Lightning. We talk about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, we're going to talk about our first sponsor on today's show, and that is our friends over at Monopoly Go. Now, we got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go because I know what you're saying. Flag on the play. You already talked about that. But there's so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed events where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much more to get. Unique stickers. You could trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with. Hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go. So get off the bench and go download it now for free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So as always, I want to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Give us a follow wherever podcasts start distributed in audio form. We're also available on YouTube. Subscribe to our channel there. Comment below. I want to see your Victor Hedman trade proposals because there's so many people right now, and I'm not opposed to it. It's just I don't want to trade him away for the sake of trading him away to get assets. I want quality assets. I don't want low picks. I don't want second or thirds. I want firsts, multiple firsts. That might be a little selfish, but that's just where I'm coming from. So we're talking about off-season targets, okay? And I firmly believe, and obviously I know a lot of you will really disagree with this, but I think that the Lightning are good when it comes to their forwards. Now, obviously, like I've said before, that fourth line needs a little bit of a touch up. Luke Glendening is good. I was really impressed with him, how he played in the face-off circle this year. Tanner Jeannot, as much as I like him on that line, at the same time, I don't. I feel like he kind of came along there at the end of the season, and then really he was very much missed when in the games, which I still don't understand why Cooper didn't play him in the first game. That didn't really make sense to me. Clearly, the Lightning needed the extra body, the big body, and you already know what you're getting when you're playing Florida, and not playing Jeannot was kind of a question mark, kind of an interesting tactic there. And then on the other side of that fourth line, you got Tyler Mott, who, like I said, was just really disappointing this year. You expect with the numbers he's put up over the last couple of years, especially last year, you kind of thought you were going to get a little bit more than 9 points out of him, even being on the fourth line. So, that's something that you could live with, really, having that line if you choose to do so with Jeannot, Glendening, and Mott. But like I said, I'd prefer maybe Jeannot on that third line, maybe switch Chaffee down. I really like Chaffee. I really do. I think he's ready. I think he really matured a lot in the limited amount of time we saw him. But I don't think he's done enough to at least convince me he's ready to play on that third line with Paul and Esamont. That third line kind of needs a little bit more big body, a little bit more finesse in their game. Jeannot does offer that, believe it or not. If you go back to his time in Nashville, he definitely showed it. And I still believe that he is capable of that. But really the big thing and really the really glaring issue with this Tampa Bay Lightning team going into this offseason is going to be the defensive game, because a lot of question marks. People are talking about trading Hedman. I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, not Hedman. I'm sorry, Cernak. I don't think they're going to trade Cernak. I just think that this franchise, I just think that this franchise, these players, this coaching staff, especially Cooper, Julian Brees-Boss, everybody loves Eric Cernak. They're willing to work with him. But like I said, if he's going to stick around, he's got to play defense. He's got to step into that role finally of being the defensive anchor on this blue line squad. And I said it from the beginning when they traded Ryan McDonough. I said, okay, this is Eric Cernak's time to settle in and go into that role. And since then, he hasn't really done it. We've seen flashes of it, but we need to see it for 82 games, not 40. And it had been, you kind of, maybe I'm being a little bit selfish here. I don't really care that much. People throw it in my face, or they try to. They say, well, I don't know what your problem is with Hedman. He has 13 goals. He had 63 assists this year. Yeah, on paper, that's great. But he's not getting paid to put up those stats. I mean, he is, but at the same time, he's playing to give that otherworldly defensive work. Chasing down the puck handler on breaks. Making great plays, defensively in the corner and doing all that stuff. And we didn't really see that this year. We saw a guy who really lacked ice vision. And I really want to see an improvement on that. There was times where he just wasn't playing with enough confidence. With Kyle Sergachev, I think he's going to be fine. His issue in the back in the day was just, turnovers at the blue line at the point. He kind of cleaned up on that this year. Obviously, it was a little obstructed because he broke his leg. He came back. I thought he played very well in the limited amount of time he had in this playoff series against the Panthers. But other than those guys that I mentioned, Matt Dumba's gone. I would be almost shocked if the Lightning re-signed him. And I would imagine it wouldn't be anything longer than two years. And the reason for that is because Matt Dumba, he's a dressing room, locker room guy. He's a glue guy, and that's great. A lot of people like him. But other than little spurts of defensive play, that's pretty much all he offers, other than really going out there and being a goon and taking on the other team's tough guy. Other than that, really, he doesn't really offer much. And like I said, we can't have that with the amount of defensive holes on this team, coupled with the fact that the NHL defensemen across the league have completely evolved, are completely different from what they were 5 years ago. Everybody could score. Everybody can handle the puck. And Matt Dumba doesn't do that. Every time Matt Dumba handles the puck, I get aneurysms. So looking at my kind of like my off-the-cuff UFAs coming into this summer, the name that sticks out to me, and I'm hoping that we kind of see somewhat of a good series from the Rangers. I know some of you may not like that, but it's for the best. Let's stay with me here. One of my players that I would really like to see in a Lightning uniform. I think they may have to throw a little bit money at him. He made $4 million this year. Probably going to get a little bit more of that, a little bump, maybe 45. I'm sorry, 4.5 mil, maybe close to 5, depending on how much you really want him. And that's Brett Pesce. I really like his game. He's really tough. He's really rugged. He averages 20 minutes per game. He's a guy who could really come in, help you. He's experienced. He's not even 30 yet, and he's a right defenseman. And the Lightning need that. They need that desperately. And this is a guy who has played in big games, who has played in a very competitive division. He comes down to the Lightning. You could pair him up, I think, with Sergachev or even Hedman. I think he would probably flourish a little better on the second line with Mikhail Sergachev. And I think that would be a really good combination to have for you for the next maybe 2 to 3 years. It really all depends on where the Lightning want to go, as well as where Pesce wants to be. Obviously, this is like super too early to tell free agency wish list because this guy is still playing. He's still in the playoffs. So we'll have to wait. Other players that kind of just stick out to me. Another player who I absolutely love is Alexander Carrier from Nashville, 27 years old, another right defenseman. A guy who's really just he could really be an anchor for you on the defensive side of things. He had 20 points this year, 4 goals. So yeah, he's got a little bit of touch in his game. I think though, you bring him to Tampa, you bring him onto the ice again, another second line guy. And I'm really picking guys that I think would be good on the second line because I think that if we're smart, I mean, if John Cooper decides not to meddle with the lines as much, I think Victor Hedman and Darren Radish is a phenomenal line to have on your first line. I think you have Victor Hedman who could kind of just focus on like just doing the basics for what he knows he's very successful at. And then you have a guy in Darren Radish who's tough, he could throw his body around, who has an absolute cannon of a shot, and I don't think he realizes it. And like I said on last night's episode, I believe it was, Darren Radish had the 5th fastest shot in the NHL this year, which is wild to think about it. I mean, I don't know how many people would have predicted him to be in the top 5 for fastest shot in the NHL. So that's another name we could discuss or hopefully keep our eye on in the later stages of the summer. And one more guy, I guess. I mean, I'll probably name a couple of more, but another guy that sticks out to me is Jake Bean from Columbus, 26 years old. He could play on the left. He could play on the right. He's a left-handed shot. Had 13 points this year, 4 of which were goals. Again, another guy that I think you bring him into Tampa, you throw him on the second line with Sergachev. I think that's a great line. And you know what? Then we could also have the conversation, if we want to, putting Chernak on that third line with Lilleberg. Because I really think Lilleberg and Chernak would be a great line. Because I think Lilleberg is mature enough at this time to where Chernak doesn't have to be the babysitter. I think Lilleberg has been at the NHL level long enough to kind of understand what needs to be done and how to do it. And Lilleberg's a guy that I think that if he plays his cards right and plays well, we could very well see him on the second line. But we're really planning for him, I think, or really should be planning for him to be on the second line. I mean, on the third line for now, until he has really kind of grown into that role. And you know, it's kind of like what we were talking about for years with Sergachev about how he's developing towards what he is now. He's almost ready. And I think we've gotten there with Sergs. I just think that it's kind of been delayed due to injuries and just really poor play. I think that when he's at his best in any given night, I think he as long as he consistently plays like that, on a nightly basis. He's definitely top 10 in the league, I think. I mean, he needs to work on some more stuff with his offensive game. I think that really Sergey really needs to shoot more, because there's not many players in the league that could shoot you traffic like Sergey. So let me know in the comments below. I mean, those were some of my, like I said, off the cuff wish list defensemen, more so free agents. All of them just happen to be defensemen. We'll talk about more about this as the offseason progresses and once we actually get into the thick of the summer. I mean, there's a ton of it's one of those things this year where there's some very good quality defensemen. A lot of them are going to get paid. A lot of them that, the Lightning don't need to dish out that much money. But there's a good amount of defensemen that the Lightning won't have to overpay if they want to still go out and get a good defenseman, which they most certainly will have to do. So let me know in the comments below. How do you feel about the players that I've listed here thus far? Is there someone that maybe I overlooked and maybe we need to talk about? I will talk about them. Let me know in the comments below. And coming up in just a little bit, we're going to talk about some Stanley Cup playoffs. I know the Lightning were eliminated, but that doesn't mean the Stanley Cup playoffs magically end because Tampa is not in it. We still have to talk about it. We're going to do a check-in with our bandwagon team, the Dallas Stars. We'll talk about them, and I'll also list why I picked them, other than the fact that I think they're a very good team. We'll talk about that coming up in just a little bit. But first, I'm going to talk about our last sponsor of today's show, and that is our friends over at FanDuel. Now, listen, it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So one last time, I'm going to thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. If you haven't already done so, please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. It's going to be a very eventful summer here on Locked On Lightning. Like I said, we have free agency. We got a lot of moves that are going to be made. The draft is in 5 days. We'll talk about that. There's a lot going on. And then we're also doing a full rewatch of the 2004 Stanley Cup run where the Lightning got their first cup. Full rewatch. If you want to watch along with us when the time comes, so far all the games I found are pretty much all on YouTube, so they're very easy to watch and very easy to find. And we'll be posting the links to that so you could watch the game first and then listen to my whole spiel about it. So I'm really excited for that. So you definitely want to stay tuned for that. So hit that notification button, whether you're listening to us on an audio streaming platform or on YouTube. So as newest episode drops, you'll be notified. So real quick before we wrap things up, we're talking about the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like I said, just because the Lightning got knocked out doesn't mean it magically stops. We're still, we could still root for a team from a distance. It doesn't mean if they win it all, we got to buy their gear. No, absolutely not. So I picked, just by happenstance, to pick the Dallas Stars. Last time we left off with them, they were tied with Vegas 2 apiece. They won the other night. And it just so happened that a lot of Lightning fans I saw on Twitter, it was on the 3rd that I tweeted out not too long after the game 5 ended, where I pitched the question, what bandwagon do we jump on? And actually a lot of you came back and said, let's root for any team that plays against Vegas, because supposedly Vegas, I mean, I don't see it. I kind of do, but I don't. Vegas, a lot of people claim, has pretty much copied the Lightning's playbook in terms of just picking up pieces at the deadline and whatever not. I think Vegas doesn't care as much about salary cap constrictions as much as the Lightning do. So there's maybe some foggy area there, but the playoffs in general are really starting to heat up, and I love it because you've already got one series perfectly set. You have Rangers, Hurricanes out in the East, which is going to be a phenomenal series if you want to see some great hockey played against two teams that really have a good chance. And And really, we could say with confidence, whatever team wins that series might very well win the cup. That's going to be a great series. You have pretty much two teams who have been on the cusp for a couple of years now. The Hurricanes more so than the Rangers, who a lot of people say, including myself, say, if this team just figures it out at the right time, they can win it all. And really, it's really their award to lose. Obviously, the Rangers have a little bit more pressure on them, being the President's Trophy winners, whereas Carolina is kind of just, I guess, flown under the radar. A lot of people don't really see them as serious contenders. On the other side of that, Florida's waiting for the conclusion of Toronto, Boston. I'm torn about that series because if you've been a listener of mine for quite some time, not a fan whatsoever of the Maple Leafs for obvious reasons. But I think Boston, the New Yorker in me, probably despises Boston just as much, if not more. And so I it's an entertaining series and I really like it. But the big storyline, obviously, with that, if you haven't heard, Austin Matthews is hurt. He hasn't played in his last couple of games. It looks like right now he's probably not going to play for the rest of the series. So really, I don't know how the Maple Leafs win this series. I don't know how you could force a Game 7 without one of the top 3 players in the league, top 4, definitely top 5. You got to lean more heavily on your supporting cast guys like Nylander, Nyes, Marner. It's going to be very interesting to see how really Toronto goes about all that. And then back to the West real quick. You got Vancouver and Nashville. Vancouver's up 3-2. I haven't really been paying close attention to that just because last time I heard, Vancouver was dealing with Thatcher Demko being out for some games. I'm not entirely sure if he came back just yet. But regardless of who wins that series, I do not envy them because I would imagine what's going to happen or more likely scenario. So Colorado won their series pretty easily almost. And it looks like that most likely Dallas is going to win that. And then whatever happens after the reseeding. So I think how it works right off the top of my head. Whoever plays Edmonton, I do not feel sorry for you. I do not envy you. I feel like Connor McDavid, regardless of the numbers of how he's played in this series, I'm low key rooting for him, and I also think that he's more dialed in than ever. And the reason why I'm low key rooting for him and the Oilers is just because, like I said, the best thing for hockey in the sport is having the best players in the final. Perfect world, you have Edmonton and Toronto because the NHL would love that, to see Matthews versus McDavid. And I think the rest of America would just tune out because they don't want to see 2 Canadian teams play. But super exciting. I mean, there's so much that I just love the NHL playoffs, regardless if the Lightning are in it or not. And it's just unfortunate that we are dealing with one year where they're not. But I feel like even though we did pick Dallas, I think my fandom is going to change as the playoffs go on, regardless if Dallas is in it or not. And let me know if you don't. What is your bandwagon team that you're jumping on, and why? Let me know in the comments below. So we'll be back tomorrow to talk more news about possible trades and possible obviously I want to hear all your trade proposals for a potential Victor Hedman deal. And some of your targets as well for the offseason. We'll be back tomorrow afternoon to talk more Lightning hockey. So that's been it for this episode of Locked On Lightning, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Adam Danker. I'll talk to you in the next one.